Burlesque by Kamari333 Chapter 2 Average Days. Red finished hooking up his brother's new smart TV, setting up and calibrating the system. Stars forbid Boss learned to do it himself. Shoving the remote into the larger skeleton's hand with a few curt words of warning about how fragile it was, then took a hasty shortcut to work. It was a good thing Red could warp space-time, or he would have been late. Sometimes Boss was so selfish. Why couldn't he have done it last night, while his brother had been out? Because Boss insisted that he be present to supervise, even though the whole point of Red having to be there in the first place was that he knew jack shit about the damn thing. Red growled, pushing his way out of the bushes, brushing leaves and twigs off his clothes as he approached the run-down building he now spent 5 days of his week, Ebbett High School. Fuck my life. That was Red's mantra as he wove his way through the parking lot, ignoring the group of teenagers currently egging some poor schmuck's Mercedes. Anyone dumb enough to leave a car that nice in a high school parking lot deserved what they got. Red got his teaching license years ago because he liked kids. He liked kids because they were innocent, lacked the conditioning for judgment, and lacked the experiences to make them lose interest in the world. He had been hoping to work with smaller kids, the kind who would have been wearing stripes. But the board, in their infinite ignorance and glory, had decided his physical appearance made him less than desirable. Red supposed he should have been grateful to be given a job at all, considering, and at first he was. But then he learned what human teenagers were like. Fuck my life. The mantra that had been his constant companion in the underground followed him here, ever present and ever applicable. "Hey, Red," one of the egg chuckers called, voice filled with sadistic glee. "Want to join us?" Red leered at the kid out of the corner of his eye. It was a pale-skinned human male that Red recognized, a senior named Kevin who had failed Red's general science class 3 times and was now failing a 4th. Kevin rubbed Red the wrong way, in no small part because he was a disrespectful little shit. The use of Red's nickname might have been seen as impudence, except Red preferred it, personally uncomfortable being called Mr. Seraph, which he made clear to his students, and no longer used to anyone but his brother calling him Sans. No, what Red found disrespectful about Kevin was how he completely squandered every opportunity Red, and every other teacher, gave him to improve himself. Red could understand a little laziness, but from what he could see, Kevin wasn't lazy. He just didn't give a damn. Which was a shame, because in every other respect the kid was a human after Red's own heart, rebellious and defiant with a dash of good, not-so-clean humor.
"Get your ass in the damn building, meat bait,"
Red snapped.
"It ain't summer yet."
"Oh no, the monster's gonna eat me," Kevin snarked, making his equally unsavory friends laugh. Red rolled his one crimson eyelight, passing them by and catching a glimpse of the license plate. The car belonged to the PE teacher, who was a complete racist towards monsters. Even worse, the guy had the gall to pretend that he wasn't, going out of his way to act friendly to Red's face. However, Red had a particularly acute sense of hearing, so he knew that the moment he was out of the laughably small radius humans called earshot, the two-faced prick would mouth off to whatever human was closest. Not that Red needed to hear that to know that the guy's smile and kindness were fake as all hell. And fuck did Red hate fake. Red decided he would conveniently forget the names and faces of the vandals. What was that? I didn't see anything. Too bad. It was a nice car. Inside the building, the AC had broken again. It would probably be a few days before anyone could get a repairman in to fix it. Red considered doing it himself. Piece of shit was simple compared to some of the machines he had built from scratch. But given that that would be work he wouldn't get paid for, and that if he did, everyone would likely try to get him to fix everything else broken in this shithole, he decided against it. He couldn't figure out why it was that the school wouldn't just hire a competent mechanic, but for some reason, none of the professionals hired intermittently over the past few years Red had worked there had been skilled enough to fix it for good. That left many a day when it was too cold, and many a day where it was too hot. And while Red wasn't in danger from the elements by any means, it still left him uncomfortable, and by extension, irritable. Just one more thing on the list of reasons why today was awful. Red made his way down the currently empty hall, peeling off his leather jacket and hanging it over his shoulder one-handed. He glared irritably at his classroom door, listening to the din inside made by his first period students, before kicking it open in just the right way to be loud but not actually do any damage. It was an art form he had long ago perfected. The room was instantly silenced, and all eyes fell on him. He grinned, showing off his implant in the fifth most menacing way he knew how, as he sauntered over to his desk, hung his coat over the back of his chair, and sat down. Red scanned the room with what he knew was an intimidating look, watching with no small amount of amusement as some of his students cringed and cowered. These were freshmen, and although they had spent first period with him all year, most of them didn't have the intuition to tell the difference between his moods. Not that it mattered, given that most of the time Red was genuinely pissed off, his smile plastered on his face for the sole purpose of not making the weak-willed humans piss their pants. But even when his grin was genuine, for better or worse, he still saw no change in their response to it. Perhaps they could smell he was a sadist at heart. Perhaps they had heard warnings from the seniors, who knew he was a sadist. Perhaps it was just cosmetic, his edgy appearance a contributing factor to how he was perceived. Either way, his smile never eased the tension in their shoulders, and Red was perfectly content with that.
"Morning, fleshbags,"
Red greeted them, keeping his low, gravelly voice even and just short of menacing, which, for Red, was downright amiable.
"Today, I'm gonna give you an opportunity you'd be stupid to pass up."
Half the class let out a synchronized collective groan. They knew by now what Red had in mind when he said that. Pop quiz. Red felt the tug of a genuine, vicious smile and schooled his face into something more subdued as he opened his desk drawer. There was a soft red glow still pulsing along the inner wall, telling Red nobody had tampered with the contents since he left it. With a delicacy Red might have been ashamed for others to notice, he pulled out the wad of papers he had prepared last Friday and wiggled them next to his head, showcasing them for the class.
"You're gonna get to try for a little extra credit."
A few of his students sat up a bit straighter, a spark of eagerness in their eyes. Of course, they weren't the ones that actually needed the credit. The ones who did need it looked less than enthusiastic. Red shrugged. He was one of the few teachers who wasn't afraid to fail their sorry asses. If they hadn't learned that by now, well, they would by this time next month. With a flick of his wrist and a little blue magic, Red distributed the test out to the class, all from the comfort of his chair. He then sat the pack of papers down on hand for the next period, and leaned back, propping his feet up on the desk.
"Drop 'em off on your way out. I don't care what you do after you're done, so long as you keep your mouth shut."
He then sat back and watched the carnage. Red was uncharacteristically proud of the end-of-the-year extra credit tests he drew up, but this one had been his best yet. It consisted of 25 questions, each worth 4 points. The questions started off easy, touching on subjects that had been taught in previous years or in his classroom. However, after about 10 questions, the difficulty spiked, delving into topics usually reserved for college-level education. The last question, especially, was about quantum physics, an essay question pertaining to superposition. Compared to the stuff Red was versed in, it was a simple question, but he knew that there was a low probability of it being answered correctly here. He watched with undisclosed eagerness, waiting for his students to catch on to what he had done. The reactions he got were not disappointing. In a way, it reminded Red of the Underground, where his brother would set up traps and puzzles to confuse and confound, and on many occasions, maim, trespassers. Red had watched him put his subordinates, the K-9 unit, through them on the first of every month, testing their effectiveness with live participants. The looks of shock, betrayal, and horror that he now saw on the faces of his students were not dissimilar to the looks that had crossed the monsters' faces all those years ago. It gave Red a kind of rush, one that he wondered if his brother had felt back then. It was almost enough to put Red in a good mood. Almost. The best reaction came during third period. One of the students, who would forever be known as Nope Kid, shot to his feet, flipped his desk, and stormed out of the room, giving Red the finger on his way out. Red actually laughed, which surprised his other students, prompting him to hiss at them about keeping their eyes down. He still had a reputation to keep. Lust started off his morning with a nice, refreshing shower, reveling in the feeling of the water purifying his bones. For the 1000th time, he wondered how he had survived without a bathroom underground. The occasional sponge bath was not a substitute for a real shower. Sure, he was all bone and didn't really require regular sanitary maintenance, But given he was regularly splattered with ectoplasm and alcohol, he hadn't realized what it meant to truly feel clean until he had been introduced to a human-style bathroom, complete with detachable shower head, which was a glorious amenity that allowed him to take the edge off in the mornings. Lust stepped out of the shower and patted himself down with a fluffy white towel, humming contentedly as the steam rose from his bones in response to contact with the significantly colder air. He liked his showers like he liked his men. Hot. As he passed the mirror, he smiled at his reflection. He might not have the same defined cheekbones or strong jaw that his brother had inherited, but even so, Lust thought he was pretty good-looking. His large optic canals were easily his most striking feature, allowing the glow of his eyelights to express themselves uninhibited. Or perhaps you're blind as well as a narcissist. Shaking his head, Lust made his way back to the bedroom, pulling on his clothes with the speed derived from practice as opposed to effort. Shaking out his well-used vest, he inspected it again for unsavory residue. Finding none, he really should be concerned about how good he was at keeping his clothes clean, even during amorous activities. He snatched up his fingerless gloves and took a shortcut to work. Lust liked dancing. It was genuinely fun, but he didn't want to make it his livelihood. What he got from Girlby for his performances was entirely secondary. It wasn't that Lust thought it was a bad way to make a living. He knew most of the ones who worked there, and they were perfectly nice people. It was just that Lust wanted to keep the act something he did for fun, for stress relief. He didn't want there to be any pressure. He didn't want to rely on Girlby any more than he had to. So Lust did the only other thing he was good at: chiropractics. Even for a skeleton, Lust knew exceedingly too much about bones. And thankfully, humans had plenty of them. So he was able to get a job at a local practice. At first, they only used him as a secretary, and sometimes as an example, showing the patients what was going to be done. Lust was used to being on display, so it hadn't bothered him too much, but he eventually got his own license and became a full member of the staff. Today, he had 3 scheduled appointments, one from an elderly male who was a little too chatty, a regular who requested him often enough for Lust to know him by name, Antony, a young male who had come in after apparently getting a bit too rough in some kind of sports game, who had asked for Lust because he was a novelty, and a female who was just on the wrong side of enthusiastic about physical health, and got it into her head that a skeleton would be the healthiest choice for tending to her bones. Lust wasn't certain if he was amused or insulted by that. After all, he had worked for his skill. He wasn't born with it. But at the same time, he had to admit it was pretty fitting. That was actually a busy day for Lust, since he didn't get that many clients. There were a few too many people still uncertain about having a monster treating them. Thanks to that, usually Lust was the one who tended to the walk-ins. There would always be a few people who wandered in, deciding their back or neck pain was worth getting looked over. Lust was also the one who tended to monster patients. However, given the nature of monsters, and the fact that most preferred to take care of their aches and pains with the convenient healing properties of monster food, there hadn't been that many. All in all, Lust had become the glorified secretary, who occasionally took on the more eccentric customers. Most of the time, it wasn't that different than when he was a sentry back underground. He would sit at the front desk, head in his hands as he napped, only be jerked awake by the sound of the bell that rang when the front door opened. It wasn't the worst job to have, but it certainly didn't leave him feeling fulfilled. He never accomplished anything. Not really. Lust sauntered through the front door, his usual pleasant smile on his face, as he heard the first ring of the bell. He slid into his desk chair and sighed, nuzzling into his arms, getting comfortable. Nobody was likely to come in for a few more hours, but that just meant he had time to get a nap in. He had to be rested if he was going to have any fun tonight. Hours passed. His clients, no, the correct word was patients, came in with good moods and left in better ones. Lust always made sure of that. A few knowing nods here, a few questions there, a little bit of flirting, just enough to make them feel wanted and appreciated, but not so much that they thought he was interested. Lust was a master of the social arts. He had to be, if he was going to keep his human patients coming back. Not that he enjoyed the idea of them being injured, but as he took his spot at the front desk and filed away the last of the paperwork, Lust considered again becoming a masseuse instead. He'd get more regulars. He knew plenty about muscle tissue, and it wouldn't be hard to get a second license, but he could already picture the backlash he would get. There were too many humans who judge monsters by their looks, and too many monsters who didn't see the merit of such things other than as a precursor to other activities. Activities which Lust had no desire to make his profession. It probably wasn't worth it, not when his job here paid the bills just fine. Lust had settled into his preferred position for a nap, his arms folded on the surface of the desk, his head cradled in them, when he heard the bell ring again. He shot up, focusing acutely on his surroundings. In walked a monster Lust had never seen before. Or at least, he didn't think he had. At the same time, they were awfully familiar. Perhaps it was because they were a skeleton monster. He was short, only a few centimeters taller than Lust, and Lust knew he was on the small side, especially for a monster. Dressed in a blue hoodie and baggy pants that got progressively more rumpled the closer they came to his sneakers. There was a world-weary smile on his face, which Lust might have mistaken for contentment if he hadn't been so practiced at reading people. "Hey, is this the place with the monster bone master?" the monster asked, chuckling softly. Lust grinned wider. "Why, yes it is. Would you like to make an appointment? Or perhaps you'd prefer to be looked at now? We have an opening." The monster took another step forward, his posture stiff, his gait awkward. "Now, if you don't mind, I've already had to skip work to find this place." Lust nodded, understanding. He stood up, snatching a clipboard and a few papers up as he showed the other skeleton to a room not currently in use. "Fill these out, and I'll be right with you." The other monster took the offered clipboard, and Lust went to inform his superiors about the walk-in. The school day ended, leaving Red alone in his classroom. He stretched, yawning, looking at the pile of ungraded papers with a mixture of curiosity and annoyance. He carefully picked up the one left behind by Nope Kid, and gave him a +2 bonus for knowing how to make an exit. Then he started in on the rest of the tests, his pen racing with deftness and precision, marking down X's on incorrect answers with the finality of a death sentence. Not that Red saw it that way. To him, it was just his way of getting through the monotony as quickly as possible. Sometimes Red had to stop and grip the ridge of his nasal bone, closing his eyes to the idiocy of some of the answers. Plants would suffocate and die in an oxygen-only environment, you fucking Neanderthals. Geothermal energy doesn't have a damn thing to do with falling rocks. Do not mix bleach with ammonia, you dumbass, that's how you die. Fucking stars, how are you still alive? Taking a deep breath, Red forced himself to keep going. He trudged through the pile, his claws clicking on the wood of his desk on occasion, the only sound besides the scratch of his pen. Red picked up the last test in the pile, looking the final page up and down with amusement. Well, well, well. The last page was dedicated exclusively to the last question, implying that it would take a whole page to convey the correct answer. However, this kid had only written 2 words. Schrodinger's cat. Red gave them full credit, smirking. Snarky little shit had potential. Making the last mark on the page, Red dropped the test in his warded drawer and stood up, kicking the drawer closed before making his way out of his classroom, jacket in hand. He walked once again through the now empty hall, working mostly on autopilot as his thoughts drifted back to the usual maelstrom of complaints. It was still hot as all hell in the building, which he wanted to get out of as soon as possible. He considered taking a shortcut, but he didn't want that little power of his being caught on camera. The less everyone knew about what he could really do, the better after all. And one of the few things that did actually work in this shithole was the security system. That's why he had painstakingly scouted out all the best places to use as a checkpoint. Leaving the building, Red made for the nearest safe spot to shortcut from. He needed to get his phone back, and maybe have a drink. Most definitely have a drink. Lust returned, now wearing a pair of tight, elbow-length latex gloves, looking over his new client. Patient! Stars, damn it, he was a medical professional. He took hold of the clipboard, skimming over the information. "So, your name is Dance?" "That's what people call me," Dance replied, shifting in his seat on the cushioned table bed. "That's what people call me." How many times had Lust said that same line? He knew what it meant. That's what everyone knows me by now, but that's not really my name. But at this point, it might as well be, and I've accepted it. Lust knew that bittersweet feeling, how it meant that the world knew you and had defined you for who you were, but in doing so had left parts of you behind. He shook his head, focusing on the rest of the information. "You hurt your lower back. May I ask how?" Dance shrugged. It's what happens when 2 tons of metal and rubber fall on top of you. What? Dance chuckled. The jack broke while I was under a car, and, well, my HP didn't fall, but I've had this somewhat distracting pain ever since, and my spine doesn't quite look right. He shifted again, his movements stiff, and Les realized it was because he was suppressing pain. I didn't want to make a big deal about it, but my bro insisted I go see someone, so here I am. Les put the clipboard down, concerned now. Could you show me, please? Dance shifted uncomfortably again, his face only barely masking the internal debate. He must have made up his mind, because after a moment he lifted up his hoodie to expose his spine. Les sucked in a breath, not taking his eyes off the bone that was very obviously knocked out of place. That's... Your discs have been misaligned. I'm surprised you managed to stand. Lay back, easy. Dance did as he was bid, moving carefully so he was lying flat on the cushioned surface. That bad, huh? He asked, hiking his hoodie up and out of the way. His face was flushed a pale blue, although it was uncertain if it was from pain or embarrassment. Les got a stool and stood on it to give him better reach over the surface that was elevated a bit too high for him to work comfortably. Yes, very bad. The spine is the core of the skeleton. Any damage to it can result in irreparable consequences. How long has it been like this? Les carefully placed his hands on the discs above and below the misaligned ones, feeling for cracks or breaks he might have missed with his eyes. The soothing, tingling pressure of the other monster's magic enveloped his hands, and while the gloves muffled the sensation, they couldn't block it out completely. Les could feel the cool, tightly controlled energy. It was like dipping his hand into water right at the top of a waterfall, with all the rush of knowing just how much power it was about to unleash, even though at that very moment it was gentle and unassuming. He felt his own magic pulse inside him, wanting desperately to mingle and reciprocate, but he held it back. This was work. This was not the time. The blue dusting across Dance's face took on a deeper hue, one of his eye sockets squeezing shut. A week? He clutched at his hoodie, pinning it to his chest. Lust understood. He had his hands in a vulnerable and somewhat intimate area, and no amount of professionalism was going to change that fact. This is gonna hurt, isn't it? Yep. Lust wasn't going to sugarcoat it. There was no point. After all, the guy had to already be in agony. He was in agony. Now that Lust was in his magic, he could sense it, the tension, the way the current would surge and undulate, especially around the area in question. Oh yes, he was in pain, and he had been for days. Lust needed to act quickly, or make it as easy on the poor guy as possible. I can't give you anything for the pain, either, so you should probably bite something. He looked up at Dance, grinning a little wickedly as he carefully adjusted his grip for what he was about to do. That something can be me if you'd like. Dance stared at him almost unseeingly, then threw his head back in a deep melodic laugh. Les smiled. That really was a beautiful laugh. Now was his chance, while the other wasn't thinking about it. With a quick motion, Les wrenched the offending vertebrae back into their proper place, popping the discs back where they belonged with an audible crack. Dance's laughter cut off with a sharp intake of breath, sweat forming on his body as he quivered on the cusp of his tolerance, eyelights completely dark as a quiet, high-pitched whine escaped him. His one hand balled into a fist in the fabric of his hoodie, while the other clawed at the cushions below him. Both hands shook. His chest heaved frantically like he was hyperventilating. Considering how much that must have hurt, he was taking it rather well. Les couldn't help being impressed. After pausing the motion of his hands, letting his patient adjust, Les began making soft, smoothing strokes up and down Dance's lower spine, probing to assure himself it was now properly aligned and no cracks or fissures had developed. He knew that, at the same time, he was giving Dance another sensation to focus on, one that he hoped was a bit more pleasant, calming. He added to the effect, radiating analgesic intent with controlled pulses of his own magic. There, Les murmured, trying to maintain a soothing tone despite his own nervousness. The worst should be over. How's it feel now? Dance's breathing had slowed to something more even, his widened eye sockets drifting shut as he took slow, rhythmic breaths. Les knew they weren't strictly necessary. Likely he was doing them to calm himself further. Hard to say at the moment. Dance's voice was softer than before, shaky, but still clear and lucid. Les nodded, pulling his hands away, reluctantly, oh so reluctantly. When you're ready, I want you to sit up, slowly, okay, sweetie? Dance nodded, letting the bottom of his hoodie fall back down to cover his midsection. After a few more moments, he pushed himself slowly upright. He sat back up, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed, his eyelights returning, only to blow up 2 sizes in abject wonder. With a bound, Dance sprung to the floor, twisting this way and that with elegance and practice. Les gulped. Stars, he even moves like his namesake. Dance grinned, tension almost completely gone from his face as he settled his hands in his hoodie pockets. Gotta hand it to you. You sure know your stuff. I felt good as new. Wonderful, Les returned, sighing with relief. He had been worried he might have been too rough trying to make it fast. Now, if you feel any numbness or tingling or anything unusual, come right back, all right? Gotcha, Doc, Dance replied, heading out the door. He stopped, looking over his shoulder. About the bill. Les chuckled, picking up the clipboard. You have until the end of the month to pay. I'll be waiting. He winked playfully. It wasn't even a lie. He would be waiting. Dance smiled, pulling his hood up over his face as he left. With a sigh, Les peeled off his gloves and left the room, sinking back into his seat at the front desk, letting his face make direct contact with the unforgiving wooden surface. His hands gripped his pelvis, thumbs hooked over his ala and digging down painfully to try and press back the painful burn that was clawing at his body. What was the point of last night if he was just going to get riled up again at the drop of a hat? Or, hoodie. He groaned softly, willing his soul to obey. It was a good thing he was going back to the club tonight. Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening. If you liked it, hit the like button to let me know and subscribe to see what I make next. Links in the description lead to the original fic posted on AO3, as well as my Patreon and Ko-fi. If you like my stuff, please consider supporting me. Every little bit helps. Lastly, if you have a request for a recording, whether a one-shot or a series, let me know in the comments. I also do commissions, details of which are on my Patreon. So keep in touch. Bye!